Hi guys, welcome to another BigLipz podcast. As always, my name is Catherine Maurice. Joining with me is my good friend Sam Macaulay Blair.
Howdy.
As always, we are two current and former film students. We started the podcast talking about film and all things film, different elements to it, what we loved about it, things like that. And we decided at the year mark to swap to TV. So last week we had our kind of content related podcast, and this week is our kind of concept related. So yeah, this is season 2, episode 4, and this episode we're going to be talking about adult animation, and by that I mean cartoons or animated shows that are aimed specifically at adults, not necessarily family shows that have like in jokes and things like that. So yeah, we'll just jump right in. Sam, if you want to, do you have any favourites? Any favourite shows that you like to watch? You like to binge watch or anything like that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I just want to mention quickly as well. I'm glad the clarity on adult animation. One of my flatmates just as I was like grabbing food before, I mentioned obviously going up to record this podcast, and they were like, "Oh, what's the podcast on?" And I was like, "Oh, adult animation," and they were like, "Oh," and I was like,
Yeah, that would be
not
a very
that."
different type of podcast.
We'll get there one day.
Yeah, we're just slowly
But
working our way through all kinds of mediums. We'll
I
get
know,
there.
to be
That's
fair,
season 3.
yeah. I know that would definitely make for an interesting season. Anyway, but
Yep.
I digress. To answer the question that you asked, well, yeah, because I guess I'd be curious what your definition of adult animation is. Yeah, and you did obviously say like, because it depends where the line is, but I guess like going for things that I would say are explicitly adult animation that I very much enjoy. Rick and Morty's one I've mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's fantastically well written and sort of produced and of course it's like voice acted and stuff, and I think it's just like it's just like an endlessly sort of creative show. And it is just like off the wall sort of nuts. And I do just sort of love like how sort of fast and snappy it is. Like I think it very much shows, like we do live in an era where, and I feel old saying this about like attention spans getting lower, but they genuinely are, in the sense that like, you've like things like TikTok and stuff make, everything is so condensed in terms of entertainment that like a second on screen feels longer than it ever did, and Rick and Morty very much feels like the sort of like answer to that, where it is just like it moves at just like such a breakneck pace, and it jumps tracks a lot, but it manages to actually be concise. Like you follow it, but you do feel like there's certain episodes in particular you do feel like, okay, I actually have to like have my brain on for this. It's not
Yep.
it's not something I can just vegetate in front of, which is good. Like I like animation that does that, or just storytelling in general that does that. Is nice to sort of be challenged as a viewer and to feel like you have to sort of keep up with something. Like it's nice. Yeah, you always want to be engaged, I think. So Rick and Morty is definitely a favourite. Another one that I was very surprised when I first watched by how much that like I sort of come to love it is Big Mouth. Like I very much, like, I was so hesitant to watch it. I remember it coming out just before I moved to France, and I remember people sort of talking about it being really good, and I had like the vaguest ideas of what it was, and I was like, it just doesn't seem like my sort of thing. I remember going to like a house after a night out with like some people, and someone put it on, and even just like the brief snippets I saw there, I was like, yep, this show's every bit as crude and
Yeah.
juvenile as I sort of expected it to be. And it wasn't until like couple years later, or maybe it was the next year actually, I was in London with a friend, and we were there for the weekend, and he just kept going on about it. But he, knowing me very well and knowing my sort of humour very well, like was, mentioning sort of making mentions to like references in the show, but ones that I genuinely did find interesting and sort of funny, and he got me to watch a few episodes back to back, and I was again like, for me season 1 I think is like the weakest of the show, but I think like I have come to like really love the show. I think it genuinely is like it can be really crude, and there are parts of the show where I'm just like, I just wish you weren't. I wish you dialed it down a little bit.
Yep.
But I do feel like I guess the thing that it has a point. Like the show is there for a reason, and I think I constantly appreciate that. Like it's not, I'm not really seeing the benefit of that, but at the same time, like it does reflect. I think it reflects experiences at some point everyone's had. And I think it is the sort of thing that will actually be quite important to people who are sort of young right now. Like I feel like it's the sort of show that will probably help a lot of people who are in like very sort of specific situations. And yeah, I will also say just like the one thing that I guess surprised me by it and I wasn't expecting to enjoy so much was I find the hormone monsters hilarious.
Yes. Do you know what's funny? Big Mouth was one of my choices. Pretty much for exactly what you were saying, where I had written in my notes I was struggling to think of another show excuse me, that so accurately presents what it's like to grow up and to be like a 14-year-old girl. And it does it in such a way where it's so, like you're saying, it's really refreshing to like watch it. Obviously we're both adults now, but you're watching it and you're like, oh my god, remember when you thought things like that, or you thought the world was ending because of this or whatever. But yeah, in my notes as well, the hormone monsters are the best part of that show.
They're so just like ridiculous, and again they almost like similar to Rick and Morty-esque, where like they'll come in sometimes and they'll just say something that is in no way connected to anything, but it's just like one of the funniest things you've ever heard. I mean, the show in general has bits of that. I think one joke, and I'll mention this because obviously we were a film channel and stuff, so there's relevance to bringing it up here. One of the jokes that absolutely floored me, and that I've got a friend that mentions all the time, is in, I think it's the 4th season. They have like a bit in the first episode where they've got like a mysterious new principal in the school, and you think at the time you're like, oh, it's going to be like a weird running joke where you're gonna like they're gonna keep like shoving it in your face, and I think they pretty much like never mention it again until the very last episode, and then they openly acknowledge the fact, I'm pretty sure, that like they've not really referenced this all season, and it turns out to be Roman Polanski.
Oh.
Which was just like, oh my god, was the most left field and unexpected choice, but at the same time it's just like so inappropriately hilarious.
Yeah.
And to me just funny. Kind of like embodies yeah, just like the mental humour of the show. So yeah.
No, good choice. I always loved them as well, the hormone monster. The female hormone monster, because it's Maya Rudolph for one thing, who I adore. Yeah. And there's I find it so hilarious. One of my favourite bits was when it's the character Jessie, she's just started her period or whatever, and she's all over the place, like she's in bad moods and she doesn't know why, stuff like that. And the hormone monster, like her mum comes in, and her mum's been perfectly nice and perfectly pleasant, and the hormone monster starts screaming in Jesse's face like, oh, tell her she's this, that, and the next thing, and tell her you hate her, and start chucking things. And I just found it so funny because like when you're 14, life is exactly like that. Like you get fly into a rage like that for no reason, and you're so nasty to everyone. I just thought it was so funny.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it does such a good job with the characters as well, of like depicting different kinds of problems, because everyone has problems in it and everyone has their own sort of specific perspective, and it does such an interesting job of like weaving them together and constructing this narrative that is so like specific but so also like I guess generalized, and it just is so good for capturing, like that's the thing as well, like the metaphorical nature of the storytelling with the hormone monsters, because they even expand it beyond that, where they have like, was it the depression kitty and the love bug and things like that, and they're so good at building these like metaphorical sort of like creatures that do a perfect job of like representing like different ways that you are feeling. I also love the fact that like the finale of every season, they just really like just go mental with it. Like they have like a really high concept like last episode, and again it's just like a nice way to kind of like end things, because they're just like unafraid to kind of like really really push the boundaries of what the show can do. But yeah, no, Big Mouth is an absolute classic. Another one that I was just come out, so it's not even like a long running thing, but it came out on Amazon Prime, and I think me and my flatmate watch the entire thing in like one sitting because it is quite short. Like the episodes are like 10 sort of 15 minutes long, and that's the spin-off of The Boys, which is called Diabolical. Have you seen it?
I haven't. No.
No. Have you seen The Boys?
No.
No. The Boys.
The Boys. It's what was that again?
It's a superhero show.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that.
But it's quick like pitch for The Boys, because The Boys is like utterly superb. Like even if you don't like Marvel movies and sort of superhero content, The Boys is probably like the thing that you would still really like, because it is like ridiculously, well done television in terms of like production value, writing, acting, and it constantly pokes fun at the sort of genre and things that have like happened even like in the real world, because basically the idea is like it's the Justice League but if they were real people. So it's all about the sort of like, these are people who are very arrogant and they act like celebrities would, but they have a public persona, and there's people managing them and trying to make sure they stay within like these like parameters that the company has like built for them. And it's really like, again, it's really bleak as a show at some points, but it's so fantastic as it's also really funny at points, because it just kind of isn't afraid to go there. And the spin-off is like an animated show where like every episode is a different like animation team, I think, because animation style is like completely different. Like I'm pretty sure the people from Rick and Morty do one, because they literally have like the Rick and Morty style humor and animation for an episode. But again, because they're like just bite-sized, they're just like they're fantastic to watch. And it is like, I'd say it's one of the most like bingeable things I've ever seen, because like you watch one and you're just like sort of speechless by the end of it, and you're like, well, I need to know what the next thing's going to be, because it's going to be completely different, but at the same time it's probably going to leave me feeling exactly the same way.
Yeah. No, that sounds good.
So yeah, The Boys is another one, and then there's one I wanted to mention which I haven't even properly seen. It just lurks in like some dark corner of my brain, and I'll need to actually dig it up someday and give it a watch properly, because all I know is I wasn't allowed to watch this when I was younger. Okay. And I mean, at the age when like I was suddenly allowed to watch things like Family Guy and American Dad and all and even like South Park and stuff, like there was an age when like I was suddenly allowed to watch these things, but I still wasn't allowed to watch this thing. And I saw like snippets of it, and the snippets I saw of it were like funny. So I've always like wanted to dig it up and find it, but I was kind of surprised because it never came up on any lists. It's called Monkey Dust, if you've ever heard of it.
No, I don't think I have.
Again, I'm really curious at like what it's actually like as a show. I think it's just like individual sort of like segments and like vignettes and stuff. I don't think there's like an overarching narrative that's connected, at least not from what I saw. So again, like I'm very curious at like the places the show goes. And I guess the last one I'd mention would maybe be I when I'd first moved to Manchester, I developed like a real love for Archer, which like was quite brief, but like for like a few months I just watched it non-stop. I think I watched like up to season 5. I'd have like an hour-long tram journey to work, and the Wi-Fi was like atrocious, but for some reason you could like stream Netflix perfectly. So yeah, it was really weird. You couldn't open like Messenger or like Snapchat or anything. You couldn't open most things, but you could just stream Netflix. Like I don't really know how that was a thing. You couldn't even open like YouTube or anything. So you couldn't open like other video apps. It just seemed to be Netflix, as if like they had a partnership or something.
Maybe they did the trams in Manchester. You never know.
I know it was fantastic, because it meant that like, you had like an hour on a tram, and you're like, great, I can literally get like 3 episodes of the show in.
Of like undisturbed, if you're not getting any other messages and things.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's nothing else to do except watch it, and it was the same going home. So you get through like at least 6 episodes, just like on public transport. So it was a really nice time, and like again, like I appreciated. Yeah, I had a friend who, weirdly, Archer seems to be like his. Almost like it was custom built for him, but he said the animation style gives him a headache, so he literally can't watch it.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
But I always would forget that, and I think we'd come back from like nights out sometimes, and I would just like put on an episode, and he'd be like, "What are you doing, man? I can't do this."
Especially after you've had a couple of drinks, potentially.
Yeah, not gonna help. Not
ideal.
But yeah, no. Again, Archer's it is quite silly, but I do appreciate like the sort of the ways in which it sort of pokes fun at like the spy movie genre. again, I just always for that one specific. I've not really watched it outside of that one specific period, but I remember just like it was just like exactly what I needed. It was like a total comfort watch. So
Yeah.
what about you,
No, that
Catherine?
sounds good. So one of my choices was Rick and Morty, which we've discussed, obviously.
Nice.
I think it's so funny, and I remember because it was Ryan that started watching it, and then he told me to watch it, and then I in turn told my bestie to watch it, but she can't
Nice.
watch it because Rick makes her feel sick.
But
Like his constant burping and the little bit of like whatever is on his face.
to be fair, like when I first, because it was a flatmate of mine years back, before I even lived with the guy. He was like obsessed with it, and I remember him putting episodes on for me, trying to get me to like try to indoctrinate me, and that was the thing that I really struggled with to begin with, which I'd completely forgotten until you said that. But I genuinely remember it being like physically uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and it's so weird because now like I just don't even it's not even like a thought or a factor, and I don't know at what point I like changed.
I love that. I wonder if she continues to watch it. Like, if I continue to bully her, if she'll ever get over it. I doubt it, but she's pretty insistent that it gives her the book. So
Fair.
obviously another one was Big Mouth. One of my few only issues with Big Mouth is the characters Jay and Coach Steve, and I get that they're meant to be horrible and disgusting, but they give me the book in that same way that Rick gives her the book.
See, Coach Steve, I think I'm very like hot and cold in the character at points. Like I love him at points. I really don't. But I do. Jay is one that I agree with. Like I always forget how much I don't like Jay as a character until like. A new season comes out and I start watching it, and then there'll be like Jay scenes, and I will like be tempted to turn it off. Yeah. And it's almost like
I'm not a fan of the actor that plays him either, because he's been in Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place and that, and every time I've seen him I've thought, oh god, here's this guy again.
I do agree. I've only seen a bit of The Good Place, but I remember him turning up in that, and I do remember it just being a bit like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't need everything that you're doing right now.
Yeah, he gives a lot. Like, he's one of those people you would, if you were the director, you'd have to be like, that, but pull it back.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that was, other than that, I love Big Mouth. I think it's so funny. I think it's, like we were talking about, like weirdly relevant with different aspects and stuff like that. One that we've discussed, or I've discussed before, is of course Bob's Burgers. I remember one specific episode as well. It's very near the beginning, and there was just one specific scene, and I don't know whether it was the way it was animated or the whole build up of the show, but it was just hysterical. Like, I was laughing about it for days. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. If I remember what episode it was, I'll put it in the description so that you can watch it, even if you just watch that one episode. But
I'll definitely give it a go, because like I tried to watch, like I've had like friends chuck on the odd episodes, usually again in the same context of like being drunk, and it's just been like something they popped on, so I don't feel like I properly watched it. But I tried to watch it with flatmate a few months ago, and we watched like the first few, and neither of us really loved it. And it is one of those where like we'd both always heard good things, and we both kind of wanted to like it, but we weren't really like. And I wasn't. We both discussed it afterwards. We were like, do you think it's maybe like you just need to get into it and then it gets really good, or? And then I think I asked a friend, and they were like, no, if you don't like it from the off, then it's not going to change that much.
Yeah, it's quite like I think once you get used to the characters and that, you can enjoy it a bit more. But yeah, I would definitely agree that if you don't like it from the get-go, it's very consistent throughout.
Fair.
I think in that one as well, the vocal performances are all like, they're all over the top and caricaturish, but it's a cartoon, so I feel like you can get away with it. Another one of my choices was of course a classic, Family Guy.
Nice.
I wouldn't even say it's a guilty pleasure, because I don't even care that people know that I enjoy it, because I think it's just so funny. I think as well there's an element of it being kind of not like a comfort watch, but definitely something you could just binge watch. It can be on in the background. Yeah. You don't really need to think a lot when you're watching it, which is what you need sometimes.
Yep.
And the last one I wanted to talk about was something I've actually not seen a huge amount of, and I couldn't tell you why. I think the issue is it's so different to things like Family Guy and Bob's Burgers and Big Mouth, where it can get quite like quite like deep and heartwarming and things like that at times. And that's BoJack Horseman. It's not, I would argue, maybe not your typical kind of adult animation where it's not all about the laughs. It's like BoJack has some actual struggles. Like he struggles with addiction and things like that. But you're watching it and he's a cartoon horse. I think so yeah, I think that's definitely such a good one. I think you and I have discussed that before when we first met, actually, because that was when I had only just started watching it.
So yeah, I tried watching it when I was going to France. Funnily enough, I downloaded a bunch because again I was like gonna be traveling for literal days. So because I had to get to London via bus, and then I had to wait in London, and then I had to get a bus to France. And then we had to move it. Yeah, exactly. So I knew there'd be lots of like downtime, and I just went on my iPad, and BoJack had always been recommended, and I think I downloaded like the first season or half the first season, like whatever like my iPad could store worth of BoJack. I think I only watched like half the first season, and I just, in no point, like, again, it was just one of those ones that just unfortunately didn't really click for me. Like I've got like a lot of my close friends are like obsessed with it, and it's one of those things that like I really want to love this show, but just like I just never find myself really laughing at it, and the sort of bleak nature and tone, I appreciate what it's doing on like a storytelling level, but again that's one actually where I think like the animation style of that kind of bothers me.
Okay, fair.
And I couldn't even put a finger on why, but I just don't really like love the animation style of it. Doesn't make me feel sicker, and I don't have like a volatile reaction to it, but I think it's just like one of those things where there's like a combination of like lots of different things that kind of all round make this show for me that I really wish I was like with everyone on, because I really would love to be, but I just unfortunately don't seem to be.
No, that's fair. I think definitely like I was saying, like that, like you're saying, the kind of bleak tone is not something that you can binge watch, or it's not something that you want to binge watch, which I think makes it a bit harder to watch. But I think because of that, the little heartwarming moments are so good, because with storytelling in any way, the contrast is what makes it good. But no, I can definitely see what you're saying. It's not, as I say, it's not something that I have even finished or caught up on. So, but yeah, I do know what you mean about the animation style as well. It's not as maybe slick or smooth as other.
Yeah, it does feel quite like cheap in a sense, I guess, and not. I mean, like, cause like, well, South Park is obviously like really sort of cheap, but that's almost like built into it so much that I feel like they get away with it. But yeah, I think like it's one of those where like with animation, in particular, like if you know you and the animation aren't vibing, then you are kind of like at a disadvantage.
I mean, the animation can't be as good as the animation in Water Babies all the time, so you just need to live with it, I'm afraid.
That's it. Ever since you introduced the Water Babies, the bar has been set too high.
Exactly, so what can you do? In terms of that, just quickly, so we can branch off quickly, do you have an animation style that you particularly like? Or, like you're saying, any that you don't like? Examples of ones that you don't like, maybe?
Again, like it's funny because it can be a more of a fluid thing than I think I realise. And the interesting thing I always find with like animated shows is, and this is why usually I do try and like persevere with them a bit, because I find that like usually like a lot of them, their animation style will improve, you know, like their style will stay consistent, but the animation will improve. Like you look at, I mean, The Simpsons is a very, very obvious example because it's like the longest running animated show. But you look at obviously like early Simpsons episodes versus like whatever it is they're churning out now, and it will,
season 53 or something ridiculous.
Exactly, but it will be night and day. Like it will be unmistakably the same show in terms of like visual style, but it will look completely different in terms of like the improvements of animation. And I think you do even notice it with like Rick and Morty again. Like if you watch like the earlier episodes, you can see that it is like a lot more restrained in terms of what they were doing, and even, I think with animation it's so much more noticeable because it affects everything. It's not just like it's not just like using cheap cameras to film something. It's like which I guess would kind of affect everything. But it's things like you notice that a lot of times, like the voice performances will like develop as it goes. Like as the sort of actors get more into the characters, you'll find things like even like the way that characters move and stuff like that. I think gets a lot more refined. So it does tend to be like an overall thing that's a lot more noticeable than like your average TV show. So I do feel like. Sorry.
I think, what I was going to say, it's always quite like an interesting, almost like a timestamp.
Yeah.
Where you can. Simpsons is such a good example. After season 9, I would argue, is unwatchable. But the good thing about the new episodes being so crisp and so clear is that you can put it on and immediately see, nope, I'm not watching this.
It's a very good point, actually, yeah.
Everyone in my house always moans at me because I'll put it on to see what episode it is, and the minute even just like the opening kind of shot comes in, I'm like, no, I'm not watching this garbage.
Yeah. That's a very good point, actually. I guess it's like it kind of works in our favour sometimes. I think like even though it hurts my friend's head, I actually do like the animation style of Archer. There's something that does feel a bit more sort of polished. Again, there is a style to it. It can be a bit weird, but there's almost like I guess a definition to the characters and the sort of environments that you don't normally get, which I think works for the sort of type of show that is. Rick and Morty is one that like I've come to appreciate the animation style a lot more of than like I initially did. I think even if I went back and watched the first season, I'd still probably feel the same way in some respects. But I think like again, so much of that show is visual, and I think it's one of those shows that like absolutely uses the fact that it's an animated show to its advantage. Like that show could not be live action, and like I absolutely love it for that. Typically, like I'm more of a fan of like the classical like 2D animation type shows. Like 3D animation, I don't think it can be really nice, but again, I guess it just like to me always looks a little bit off. I don't think either of us have mentioned any 3D animated shows. In fact, I would struggle to like think of one. But I guess
definitely not one for like adults. You can think of plenty of ones for kids. But I
was gonna say like I've watched like. I've been watching like on and off for 2 years now, the Star Wars Clone Wars series, just because I've heard really good things, and it ties into like obviously like live action shows that have come out. But like the animation style of that is like one that really really puts me off. And it's a shame because like Star Wars is such an interesting visual universe, and to have like an animation style that just looks really sort of cheap and like adds a weirdness, like a weird layer to like the movement of the characters and environments that it really does like detract from like what the show might otherwise be, I think. Big Mouth, I think, again is like one where initially I like wouldn't have like thought I'd like, but like because it is like deliberately gross in a lot of ways, but that's so much part of what the show is that I think it like really adds to it. It's an interesting one. I think it's like a difficult one to answer sometimes because I always think like I wonder how much of like my perspective on what animated shows should look like comes from just The Simpsons, and like I mean obviously like everyone's yellow in that show, but that is like that style of animation because obviously they use it in Futurama and then they're like Disenchanted, but that is just like I guess what my brain has like come to understand as like because Family Guy and American Dad I think both stray quite like close to that, and I guess like Flintstones and stuff as well, and I guess that is like just what my brain sees as like default animation style.
So I think like, that's probably from like if we're watching the Flintstones when you're young, and then you can watch the Simpsons from when you're pretty young as well. If that's what you're used to, and that's kind of what you've grown up with, it makes sense that the other kind of animation kind of follows that. I think I'm pretty much the same. Like I've kind of was saying that I like it's pretty like samey, the animation that I would prefer, and it's similar to kind of Family Guy, Simpsons and things. I do like the kind of Big Mouth thing and Rick and Morty to an extent where they look like people, you can tell that they're people, but there's something a wee bit like off about them. I think that's because it's a cartoon, it's not meant to look like a real person, it's not meant to be like realistic in most cases. So I do kind of like that where it's just a wee bit kind of tweaked and weird. As I say, otherwise why wouldn't you just make it live action?
Exactly. Yeah, very good point actually. Like, yeah, there should be a style to it. Otherwise, like, well, yeah, why use the format?
Yeah. One that I wanted to mention that I'm not a fan of at all, and you briefly mentioned it, is the animation style in South Park. It's just not for me. I think, yeah, like you were saying, it just looks cheap and nasty, and
Yeah.
I just don't. It's not for me at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. I mean, they do produce it like I can't remember what like the turnaround on like making episodes is. It is like insanely quick.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like again, like South Park's one of those ones where I had like a very seems to happen with like animated shows in me where I had like a very specific time in my life when like I just kind of discovered South Park and went through like like must have been more than 9 seasons. I can't remember how much of the show there was at the time, but went through like almost all of it. Just like devoured it over a few months. And then like since then I've just like not touched it. Like there's been like a couple of occasions where I've been with people and they've put it on and I've been like, oh yeah, like I'll watch that. And then maybe like there's been a couple of times where I've like been curious about episodes and popped them on and just never enjoyed it anywhere near as much. It's just like
Yep.
seemed to have had like a very specific time in my life where like I was all over that and then that just expired.
Yep.
And now it's just like not so for me.
That's so funny because I'll ask you in a wee second, but in terms of least favourite TV shows, animated TV shows, this was one of my choices. And one of the reasons for it was I just think that I'm 100% not the audience for it. And I don't know whether that's an age thing, maybe like a gender thing, I don't know. It's just not for me at all. And it never has been. I've never,
Yeah.
even when you were that kind of young age where you were like young and kind of, you weren't sure if you were allowed to watch it, so you would watch it really late at night when your mum thought you were in bed. Even then, it just wasn't my cup of tea. I don't know. Admittedly, I haven't seen a huge amount of it, but the episodes I have seen are definitely not for me. I think partly, like you were saying, the turnaround is so quick that it just, for me, makes it look awful. The one thing about it though, the quick turnaround is good for like, it can be very culturally relevant at times. It can pick up on things really quickly and make it relevant, whereas other shows like Family Guy are months and months and months behind because it takes so long to produce the show. So that is one thing it's got going for it. But yeah.
And even the fact that like, because it's kind of insane that like they can make an episode of South Park pretty much faster than they can make a live action show.
Yeah.
Which when you think about it, it's kind of nuts because they still have to make the episode of South Park, whereas like things exist out there for them to go out and shoot. Like I guess maybe you could argue soaps or have like a sort of faster turnaround because they won't be as I say this with ever having really watched soaps, but like they're not going to be as like on the nose with stuff as like South Park is because South Park's like a big part. I guess it's evolved based on the fact that it can be reactive to things and it's found a lot of success in being reactive to things. And I think some of its like biggest sort of most famous moments have had it very much like there has been like a reaction to things on the show and it has reacted back. Which is impressive in its own way and it is unique in like that sense as like an animated show, which I respect about it.
Yeah, that must be a very stressful working environment though. Can you imagine like something happens in the news and then you have to immediately write what is it, 20-minute episode?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, not for me.
No, I would not be for that. Do you have any that stick out as being ones that you're not as keen on?
Animated shows?
Yeah.
Obviously there's a couple that I mentioned before. I think I've only seen like bits of this one, and I might give it another go because I always hear people raving about it. But one that my brother's obsessed with, again, like whenever he's shown me it, it's just not appealed to me at all. And I think part of it is the animation style. Is the BigLipz show? If you've ever heard of that.
Yes, is it an Australian guy?
Yeah, it's like a mental Australian show. But I know like people that I know Australian people that are absolutely like crazy into it, and it does make me want to give it another go because I'm like, well, like maybe there is something there that I'll like appreciate. I always want to like things, and I think like animated shows in particular, I always want to like because there's something just so nice about an animated show.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's just like it just feels comfier than like a live action show. And yeah, like I just as a result, we'll probably give it another go. But at the same time, like usually my my like early impressions with these things are fairly sort of spot on. I think as well. Um, I don't know. I've not really watched Family Guy properly in like a very long time now. But I did rewatch some episodes of American Dad like last year. At one point with friends, and like that was one that I absolutely loved, and it was at the same time that I loved Family Guy. And my love for Family Guy, not like with South Park and that where it was like one very specific period. I did go on for years, and like I had DVDs and would rewatch them all the time. So as a result, it was definitely like part of my like viewing enjoyment a lot longer, but it now has just been one of those things that I just kind of fell away from watching it as it was coming out, and just as the episodes then start to stack up, you just never kind of go back. I think because I'm like, well, if someone ever puts it on, I'm not going to say no, but I've just not sought them out. But I do worry that like if I went back to when I rewatched American Dad, I didn't love it, and I do worry that if I did that with Family Guy, it would be the same. So those are potential ones that like I might not be on the same level with anymore, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, but funnily enough, American Dad was my other choice.
Really?
And I think it's quite similar to what you're saying. There's just something when I'm watching it, I'm just not particularly enjoying it. I don't find it particularly funny. It just leaves me feeling a bit like bleh. Whereas I feel like Family Guy is just so much funnier. I don't know. As I say, I don't know what the reason is. I haven't even written down what my reasoning is. I don't. It's weird because Peter, as a character and as a dad and a husband, he's awful, but he's somehow still more likable than Stan Smith.
Yeah.
From American Dad, and I don't know why that is.
I guess I mean, this is just be purely speculating, because I would agree, but I guess there's like a sort of harmless stupidity to Peter, and there is a stupidity to Stan as well, but there's almost like, I guess he's quite like authoritarian and very like patriotic, and sort of like he works for like the CIA, so I guess he's not, he feels a bit more sort of composed, and as a result, like I guess it's just harder to warm to his character. Like maybe the sort of thing is, again, it probably is like, you're probably easier to appreciate the character if you are American.
Yeah, I wondered that, to be honest, because maybe he just seems like overly annoying to us.
Yeah, I think even like the character of Steve, I never really liked either.
No.
I think it was all in his sort of whole group of friends. I think it was always like Roger I liked, the fish I quite liked. Who's called Klaus, like I don't know what the fish is called. I don't know why I just like didn't give him a name.
Poor Klaus.
And yeah, exactly, just because he's Germany. And I quite liked Haley. But yeah, I think like, yeah, even like there were definitely episodes of American Dad that I absolutely loved. But I think it probably was more of a miss than it definitely had like more misfires than like Family Guy did. I think Family Guy is like much more of a recipe for success.
Yeah, 100%. I think like you were saying there, it does. I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the characters, when you were like, I quite like this person and I quite like this person. Like, I'd say Roger he's like a solid character, but again, if you binge watch it, he becomes very grating.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it, actually. He does, because like, I think I noticed that when like I was rewatched a couple of episodes last year, where I was like, oh great, it's a Roger scene, and then I think every scene he was in, I was like, oh yeah, the character is just this all of the time, which I guess like they all kind of are of animated shows, but it just seemed a lot more like interesting and funny when I was younger, whereas like this time it was like, okay, I get the joke, and okay, I'm over the joke now.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think it's funny that we both have quite similar ones that we didn't enjoy. When I was looking into it, actually, there's so many that I just haven't even seen. They're not even been on my radar or anything like that.
Like what?
I can't even think now, but do you know that way there was ones that I was looking at in the list and I was like, oh yeah, I've definitely heard of that. But I don't know anyone that watches it. Like the ones that I watch, admittedly, are like the popular ones where they're available on Netflix and people watch them. People have watched them since they were young. Like I haven't. There's nothing in there that I watch that's that's like an original watch. I'm just 100% go with the crowd on animated shows. It turns out.
I get what you mean though. Like I don't know. Like there's one that I'd written down that I had like watched a little bit of. But again, it's a very short show and it is just pretty much the same joke over and over again. Was Happy Tree Friends. Have you?
No, we can't say I've seen it.
Do you know what it is?
No.
No. It is like basically the whole gag of the show is like it's this really like cutesy animated like literally like a kid show basically with these like little tree critters, and then very very quickly in every single episode it will go from just being like the nicest sweetest innocent thing to just like the most violent vulgar sort of like thing you've ever seen. And it is one of those where like I think there was a DVD of it in the house when I was younger and we stuck it on and you would watch it and you'd laugh and you would show it to friends and stuff because again it's just like if someone doesn't know what it is going in blind, it is always just like a really entertaining reaction.
Yeah.
But like beyond that it kind of was like I don't know how long the show ran for or anything. There might not be that much more of it. I mean I might have seen all of it for all I know. But it's not like when you kind of like it's one of those again, you get the joke so it kind of does stop being funny.
Yeah.
So that was like I guess one, but actually, there was another one that I'd written down, which is a very different animated show, and I also liked again around that period where when I was getting into Family Guy and South Park and stuff like that, and I think probably because like their development sort of paralleled Family Guy, and that was Robot Chicken.
Again, not one that I've seen. I've obviously seen the clips that I've seen from it are like in relation to Family Guy and things like that. So
it's a weird one because like even when I was younger, I do remember there were like skits in Robot Chicken that I was like that's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But then like the immediate next skit, I'd be like that is one of the least funny things I've ever seen.
Yeah, a bit of hit and miss.
Yeah, I think it was very very hit and miss. But I guess like when it was hit, it was like a good hit. And I think the best thing they ever did was they did a series of specials based on Star Wars, like pretty much around the same time Family Guy were doing theirs. Like I think Family Guy mentioned it in one of their Star Wars specials. They like call out because Chris, the person that voices Chris in Family Guy, Seth Green, is like one of the creators. I'm pretty sure of like Robot Chicken. So I think Peter like actively calls Chris out for like Robot Chicken kind of like jumping on their thing. But they like the Family Guy ones. I do remember being like utterly fantastic, and they do have like Seth MacFarlane does like the voice I think of like Palpatine and stuff at one point, and I think they do have like some good cameos. I think George Lucas actually cameos in it.
Amazing.
Yeah, but I think since like that period of time where I like watched Robot Chicken, I think I've like watched the odd clip to maybe be like, oh, like how would I find it now? And every time I'm just like, yeah, okay, it's done. I'd maybe revisit the Star Wars ones, but I'm not really interested in like the show.
It's never been one like, as I say, I've seen clips and that from it, but it's never been one that I've been like, oh, I'll need to watch Robot Chicken. Well,
yeah,
and I couldn't even tell you why. I couldn't even pinpoint why. But yeah. So moving on, the next kind of question is kind of like a blend of a couple of things. So I just wanted your opinion on what you think makes a good animated. We've kind of discussed it, obviously, but what you think makes a good adult animation, and maybe why, if that relates to why they're so popular. Why do you think people love them? People like binge watch them like nothing else.
Yeah, I guess I kind of wanted to. Well, I kind of wanted to ask this at the opening because when you mentioned obviously like where you were drawing the line with. Well, I was going to say like we're. I think it's an interesting question where you do draw the line in what's animation and adult animation because like, what would you obviously said that you don't include, for instance, The Simpsons. What would you include? What would you count The Simpsons as, family animation or?
That's such a hard one because I feel like The Simpsons and maybe to a slightly lesser extent Futurama, because I feel like Futurama's a bit more leaning towards adult animation than family kind of animation.
What makes you say that?
With Futurama, I think just the themes are a bit different or tend to be a bit different. It's weird because when you think about The Simpsons, there's so many things. There's like double entendres and adult in jokes and references to sex and drugs and drink and things like that in The Simpsons, but it just feels it just feels like it's geared more towards like a kind of family audience, because I feel like those things are in the background, whereas adult animation is very much like you're hit over the head with these jokes. But in terms of Family Guy, it's quite different to The Simpsons, because The Simpsons is not got the same kind of long running. I mean, it does have long running narratives, but not in the same way that Futurama does, where I'd say more with Futurama you kind of need to watch it in sequence, whereas The Simpsons you can just come and pick and choose where you want.
That's true. Yeah, there is actually. So, because I was going to say that, would you? Because I deliberately left it out, because obviously you specified The Simpsons not being included. So in my head I was like, well, Futurama's not included. Would you include Futurama in adult animation?
I don't know. I don't think I would. It's definitely in the same kind of limbo as The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Would you have included Futurama?
To be honest, I probably would have included both of them. I definitely would be more inclined to include. It is a difficult one because they're so on like the line. But I think that for me, I remember watching episodes of The Simpsons as a kid, and like Treehouse of Horror ones, and being creeped out by it.
Yeah, no, that's such a fair point actually, because there was a couple in particular that were so scary. I remember that one where Bart had his evil twin.
Yes.
And he'd like escape the basement. That was very scary, that episode.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. Like, there was episodes of Simpsons that I thought were creepy, and there definitely were like things like, as you said, like mentioned, and there's more. Futurama, I guess, explores it a little bit more, and I think that's because obviously I think the difference is probably because there are kids as characters in the show of The Simpsons, and it's a family. So as a result, I guess like there's a lot more mention of sex in Futurama than there is in The Simpsons. And they're a bit more coy about it in The Simpsons, but I feel like that's just because of the inclusion of like the child characters that kind of like automatically gets them to take that stance, and you kind of, I guess you couldn't really have it be like really raunchy in some parts and then like suddenly really sort of like hiding it. And they kind of, again, they do like, it's very much on the fringes. Like Bart works in a burlesque house in an episode. But they are quite coy about it at the same time, whereas Futurama's a lot more like open about it, but at the same time not to the extent that, you know, like the Family Guy and stuff are. But yeah, like it's a difficult one to answer. I would be inclined to say yes, but again, I also, like you say, with like the themes and stuff as well, I think they do tell mature stories at points. And for me, it does kind of change everything, because Futurama for me is like definitively like my favorite animated show, probably always will be. And a big part of that is, like you say, you need to watch it in order. It's like pretty much the only animated show that has an ending. I mean, technically it has like several, but like but I really I love that about it, the fact that like it actually, I mean, you know, they're talking about bringing it back again, which I have like mixed feelings on, because I had made peace now with the fact that it like died, and like I went on like a binge and rewatched it all a few years ago, and I do remember kind of getting towards the last few seasons and just very much kind of thinking, I was like, it didn't feel like this before when it ended the first two times, but it is now starting to feel like, okay, they are kind of running out of like ideas for episodes, and I would rather
you don't want something like Futurama that's so good to go down the line of The Simpsons, where it just plummets in terms of what's the word, in terms of how good it is.
Exactly.
I think as well, Futurama is a really interesting one, because there's one episode in particular with Fry's dog is heartbreaking, that episode.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a weird one, like as a child that would feel weird to watch, but you wouldn't get the full like experience of it if you were a child watching it. Maybe it's more sad because you're an adult and you understand, maybe you've been through that, you've lost a pet or things like that.
Yeah, I think there definitely is like an age threshold on like the emotional accessibility, and there's episodes that I've like rewatched. I mean, I think I was like 12 years old when I first sort of like started watching Futurama, and it just blew me away by like how much I loved it. I remember I had a friend that had the DVDs, and it's weird. It sounds like I mean, it was, I guess, coming up on like 20 odd years ago, but it it is weird to like talk about like a time when you'd bring around the DVDs and I had like a tiny portable DVD player and we would like sit and watch it on that and and it just was like that to me I guess added to the experience of it was like sharing it with a sort of like close friend and having this like very sort of specific because that like era of like watching things was very sort of like narrow I guess but it definitely was like any younger than that and I think I would have missed a lot of like what the show was doing and I would have missed a lot of the impact and even like getting older still and watching other episodes and rewatching episodes there's definitely like moments in the show that like hit a lot harder than they did when I was younger because I'm like okay that I now get a lot of like what they're saying and what the characters are experiencing.
No, it's like it's such an it's funny that they're both same like creator but they're such weird shows because when you were talking there I was thinking about that specific episode of The Simpsons where with Mindy and that whole episode's about Homer almost having an affair. That's not like a family friendly kind of topic so that's such a hard one to try and define because there's ones that are so obviously adult like Family Guy even though your kids watch Family Guy but then everyone I know watched The Simpsons when they were young and most people watched Futurama when they kind of got into like very early teens, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it is like an interesting one, isn't it? Like they don't seem to be a lot of shows that occupy that space that they do. Like they do very much seem to be like a sort of bridge between like, which I guess is important. Maybe that's why The Simpsons have endured so long. But yeah, it's interesting, and I guess they've helped because I mean The Simpsons kind of came first, didn't they? I guess they probably were a lot. It's interesting because we obviously grew up with it already being on the TV and it already having been on the TV for a while. You know, it was like either in its heyday or just like coming out of its heyday, basically, as we were like growing up. And I guess it would be interesting to know how it was like, you know, what it felt like when it first came out, because our perception of it might be very different to people who, you know, were maybe like a bit older or a bit younger when like the show first landed, and it might have felt a lot edgier when it first sort of debuted. It might have felt like it was pushing things in the same way that, like, you know, when Family Guy and that came out and started watching them, it definitely felt like, okay, like this is I know, like, there definitely did feel like, okay, this is adult animation as opposed to whatever like I was watching before. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know if like how people responded to it when it kind of first came out, just to see if like it was always viewed the same way, or if there was like, this is just like because it was already about when we grew up and for some reason parents let us watch it.
Yeah, no, they're definitely weird ones. In terms of stuff like that, do you think there's like, if we're talking about like adult animation in the way that we're classifying like Family Guy and things that are obvious adult animation, why do you think they're so popular? Do you think there's like a formula that they follow that makes them so good? Like in term, when I was kind of thinking about this, I was thinking mainly of like really really kind of pushing the boundaries with jokes and being in controversy and things like that. Do you think that's part of it, why they're so popular?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought the question up again, by the way, because I had like got on like such a big talk about Futurama and Simpsons that I had like forgotten. That's what stemmed it. But I think the edginess, I think that's one of the things, and you kind of see it with like, I think, well, they reference it in Big Mouth, don't they? The fact that like that show could only really exist as an animated show because like the having kids or teenage kids and like as main characters and like the way that they portray them is like they can get away with it when it's animated. They couldn't do that when it's live action.
100%.
And I think it was a friend of mine told me actually that Futurama basically got by the censors of, it was either a friend or something I watched online recently where they mentioned Futurama basically got by the censors because Bender is a robot. So as a result, he could say so and do things,
and he can drink like, as much as he wants.
Exactly, yeah, he could be that exact character, and they got away with it because he's just not human. And I think like, again, like Rick and Morty does some like outrageous things, but like they kind of get away with it because it's like, you know, really high concept and there's aliens and stuff. And I think I think that's definitely part of it, is like they will push the humor further because they can, because we just kind of like accept it when it's a cartoon. I guess because there's the suspension of disbelief, and you know, shows in general aren't real, but you just don't take it literally. And I guess that's the thing as well. Like, talking about like why they're so successful and why they're so easy to watch and stuff. I guess like, like as we said, Futurama can be like devastating at points. But it's an outlier for that. I think like. I wonder how many people have ever bawled their eyes out watching South Park. Despite it's insanely popular. It's gone on for so long, and again, like it's just this massive entity, and but you don't go in ever expecting that. And you could argue that a lot of sitcoms you don't really there is obviously like that suspension of disbelief, but I think with like live action stuff there is an expectation of more drama. Whereas I don't think you really need that with animation. I don't think you really expect that with animation. And yeah, I think as a result, it then is just easier. Going in, you're like, okay, like I emotionally, I'm kind of safe with this thing.
I think that kind of goes back to what we were chatting about before, where they can be almost like such like a just a comfort watch. Like I'll tend to like and maybe like the hour or so before you go to bed, you can just fire on a couple of episodes of Family Guy or whatever, and that's you. It's like just chill time. You don't need, your brain doesn't need to be engaged. You don't need to have all these like intense emotions flying about just before you go to your bed, which is often the case with like dramas, like you're saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I think there was definitely a period where I usually fall asleep listening to podcasts, just because it's like. The more conversational they are, the kind of better, I think. And like for me, it's just the perfect way. Like I just like having something on when I'm like falling asleep. I'll just set my like tablet up, and I know that it will just like turn off after like a podcast is usually like the perfect length, and then it will just like put itself to just like deactivate for a bit. Or worst comes to worst, I'll like drain the batteries of the thing. But it's not like I've got something like burning through the mains all night. And it's it's fairly like small, but I think. When I started doing that years back, and I'm pretty sure like before I had the idea of like putting on YouTube and opening podcasts and stuff, I think I did put on shows that I had like, I think it would specifically be shows that I had seen, just because you're not then compelled to open your eyes and watch it. You know what's happening, and there's a comfort, and I think animation was definitely one of the ones that they're quite nice ones to just like stick on and just kind of fall asleep to. I guess because it's like, it is all done vocally really. It's there's nice colours and stuff and animations in front of you, but the performance wise, it's all the actors are doing everything with their voice. So like, as a result, I guess there is like a sort of soothing and sort of like a pleasant quality to it that again you maybe don't quite get with like live action things, because it's designed to sound nice.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think as well, like just briefly going back to what we were talking about with like controversial topics and things like that. I think from a purely like I think it's funny because it's harder for like a character like Peter Griffin to face backlash than it is for an actor. Do you know what I mean? A person that you can see and that's a real person. I think maybe especially in this kind of day and age, if someone, if a character maybe says something that's offensive or anything, obviously, you shouldn't. I'm trying to make a point, but it's not coming. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not acceptable for like actors to say things like that because it's. But when it's a cartoon, you know that it's fake and you know that it's a joke.
No, I completely get what you're saying. Like it's like. Seth MacFarlane voices Peter, but he also voices Stewie and Brian, and he's putting on a voice, and that separates the art from the artist, and and even though it's like he's written, the odds are he's written the joke and like maybe directed the episode and he's produced the show and he's like doing like he's voicing the character, he is like more responsible for like the things the character is saying than like most live action actors would be, but. Again, because he has this like cartoon face, you just don't, like you say, you don't immediately have any, unless you know who Seth MacFarlane is, and even then it's still hard for your brain to kind of like connect those dots. You do attribute it to like the character, whereas in like a live action thing you see the actor, and it's then I guess a lot harder to to think of it as like, oh, it's a character, it's a persona, it's not necessarily then. It's easier to you have a face and that face will, even, you know, maybe the hair will be different or the makeup will be a lot different, but that face will reoccur in other things. And if you're looking at interviews, that'll be the face that you see. Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting one. But also, I guess what you raised, like, is worth mentioning. You do have like another side of that, I guess, where obviously there's been like in recent years there's been like the controversy over, for instance, like Apu in The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Because you have characters like that arguably, you know, you know, you have like ethnic minorities that are portrayed by characters that are actors rather, that are not ethnic minorities, and that's kind of just like gone under the radar for a very long time because it's not like they're doing blackface, but at the same time, like it is kind of like it's not dissimilar to what they're doing in a sense.
Yeah, that's such a
they
good point. Yeah,
they are using their performance in like a exaggerated, like sort of caricature-esque manner. So you do have like that problem, which I think is only really now beginning to be recognized. And even then, like, I think a lot of people don't really know where they sort of fall on it. Probably because, like, I mean, I feel like this is what, like, with the Apu thing. Again, I haven't read that much into it. I haven't like followed it that closely, but I think ultimately it comes down to like there are people who have been bullied like extensively because of like, you know, that character's existence that's been weaponized and used against them. I don't really, you know, as someone who has never fallen victim to that, I don't really have a right to tell them, oh no, you're being ridiculous. The character's not like offensive or insensitive because like they know a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I think they can there's definitely the risk that they can hide behind the animation, and I think as well, similar to that point, there's also like they can like poke fun at certain like people that are overweight, for example, but because it's a cartoon, you can laugh because it's not a real person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like there is the danger that it could turn quite nasty in that sense. And then, but then it's a weird thing. Like, where do you draw the line? It's a weird. That's like a whole other podcast discussion. To be honest.
It genuinely is, isn't it? Like, yeah, where the line is in comedy in particular. But it is definitely an interesting one. Like you say, it's I guess you need to be more wary with animation because like you can get away with a lot more, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should get away with a lot more.
Yeah, I think another point I wanted to make about why they're so popular. I'd say animation more so than live action, kind of for reasons we've already discussed, is at much less risk of becoming like stale and stagnant because, like you're saying, all you need to do is have some crazy new outlandish location or a new character or a crossover episode. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a lot more, the audience is a lot more willing to accept things like that.
Yeah.
And in animation, because we're used to things like Rick and Morty or Family Guy, we're a lot more used to just things being crazy and outlandish, and we just accept it a lot quicker than if you were watching a live action show and say they suddenly were in a different location. Or I think with live action you would, Family Guy makes the joke about it, but in live action, if people are constantly on holiday or abroad or have nice things, you're like, where are they getting all this money?
Yeah.
But with animation, you just kind of accept it that's how animation works.
Yeah, it allows them to be a lot more meta, and I guess like you say, like even like, you know, like a lot of these shows will be set in the same sort of town or whatever, the scope of it's usually bigger because again it's, you know, you don't have to go to locations and film these things, but you do notice it with like, I mean, one of the live action sort of sitcom shows that I've seen like all the way through, and it took me like, I didn't watch it all in one go, I had to like take breaks from it, but did when I was watching it like back to back was How I Met Your Mother. But you do definitely feel by like the later seasons, you're like, oh, they've been sitting in this bar for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know, you do get very, very sick of like the same sets.
Get Friends is another good example of that.
Exactly. Where they're just like always hanging around the same like coffee shop and apartment, and I think just as a result, like you do just get a bit more like tired of it. Whereas like animation, like they don't spend as much time in like the Simpsons house, and you don't really call that into question because they don't need to, but they never kind of have. They've always been able to move around Springfield and outside of Springfield, and but I would counter to that. I would actually argue, and I don't think this is the case with every animated show, but I have like for a very long time thought that The Simpsons would actually have would be doing a lot better, would be like a stronger show if it had aged up its characters. Like I think it would have been so interesting because it's in the unique position of like being such a long running TV show, and I don't think it didn't, you know, again they had the power to, it did not like they had to do it like 1-to-1, like it wouldn't have had to be like they age the same way that they would have aged if they were human. But I think it just would have been really interesting if like, you know, at least by now, like after like what 30-40 years, the characters were like 10 years older and like we were aware of that. Like I just think you could have done some really interesting, because how many like flash forward episodes have they done now? And it just does kind of like, again, it does kind of like the show is just like collapsed under its own ridiculousness at this point, because like you genuinely can't watch it all the way through and see technology in the world changing around them but them just staying the exact same age. And I'm sure they have like a million jokes that poke fun at it, but at the same time it is just like it is just a bit like, come on. That's
such a good point, actually. The Simpsons at its peak is hands down my favourite TV show, like live action included, I would argue. I think it's hysterical. I think it's so good when it was at its peak, but it's so terrible now that I don't even like to think about it. Like it's completely, so it's not something that I had necessarily thought of before, but that would be such a good idea to see. And it would be nice to see them change, because Bart being really badly behaved and Lisa being really clever and a know-it-all, even when The Simpsons was good, it does get quite old.
Yeah, exactly.
They're so predictable that you're like, oh right, well Lisa's gonna have some sort of struggle in school, but she's still gonna get a great grade. Do you know that way?
Yeah, exactly. And they're all. I guess that's it as well. They're always operating within the same like power structures and stuff. There's no, you can't really evolve, like, you know. Bart is always going to be like Principal Skinner, and you know, unless like they kill a character off or whatever, or like a voice.
But even in
actor.
cartoons, you kill a character off like Brian, and then you can bring him back.
Yeah, very good point. But yeah, it just would have been interesting to see, like, you know, if these characters were older, how do their dynamics change? Because then you could do that. You could have the dynamic change with like each other and with the people around them, and it just would have. They could have done it slowly, but it would have just kept it fresh. You would have at least then. I think it would have kept people coming back to it as well, because I think I've been way more inclined to check it out every. You know, even if it wasn't great, at least coming back to it every other year to see like, okay, well now the characters are a little bit older and things have changed a little bit. What are they doing with it now?
Yep. I think one of the major issues is that they're trying so hard to kind of keep it fresh that their jokes are just awful. The storylines don't make sense. Do you know what I mean? Whereas that's such a good point. If they had something like that, that's something so easy to build on as you go through the years.
Exactly, and yeah, it's not the same. Because I mean, again, like how many episodes will they have done about where like Bart or Lisa will get a job, but you don't really care because it's just like they're doing it for the novelty of like that episode. And I guess like I have not watched it in years, so they could be doing longer like storylines, but I doubt it. It just would have been like a way to make it more interesting.
I think their most recent way to get people to watch it is just, and they've always had a lot of celebrity guests, but they make such a fuss of them now.
Oh really?
Yeah. Like, I think it works better. I always thought it worked better as well when the celebrity was just like a character. Like Meryl Streep, for example, when she's Jessica Lovejoy. Like, those just work so much better than when it's actually, like, Richard Gere. Like, why would Richard Gere be in Springfield? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think even when I was a kid, I remember that they would have, like, celebrities sometimes appear as, like, celebrities in the show. And every time I think it was just like, I mean, you're younger, you don't really know who the celebrities are anyway, but I think it was just kind of like, I don't care. Like, I'm not watching, I don't want this to really like infringe that closely on reality.
Yeah, like I'm not watching The Simpsons in case I get a glimpse of Paul McCartney. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like it just is, it's not that entertaining, and there's not really much that they can really do with. I guess it just feels safer. Like it's more interesting when like, even it's not even that great when like Family Guy and stuff do it, I don't think.
Yeah.
But at least you know with them that they're gonna like push that celebrity a bit further than like The Simpsons are going to.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, no. Before we turn it into a Simpsons bashing podcast, which I would be happy to do. Yeah, I think that was a really interesting discussion. It went kind of off on weird tangents, but I enjoyed it because TV's such a funny one, and especially like adult animation, like we're talking about, is so hard to kind of define it even.
Yeah.
So to discuss it's always going to be interesting. So thank you very much, Sam. I liked your opinions as always. Even
Thank you very much.
funny as well because we tend not to disagree too much, but adult animation seems to be one that we've got very different opinions on.
Yeah, I guess it's just there's so many. I guess there's so many more variables. It feels like with adult animation than with like other things. I think to be full TV in general, it seems we seem to be differing on a lot more than like we were with movies. I wonder where that is. It'll be interesting to see if it continues as well.
Yeah, very interesting. So obviously next week is your content podcast. So
it is, and funnily enough, without spoiling what it is, funnily enough, it is an animated show. So this is a nice sort of segue into that.
I'm excited because it's one that I've not seen. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to watch, and then we can obviously discuss from there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Exactly. Yeah, we're both going in blind, so yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see what opinions we come away with. Hopefully positive ones, or if not, hopefully at least we have like interesting things to say about it.
Yep, I'm sure we'll be fine. But yeah, as always, Sam, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. See you later.